we're not out of the woods yet. It may be calm outside. We've seen the waters recede in Tampa Bay. Some people are out taking the photographs along Bayshore, but that is the calm before the storm, because we're still going to see, more than likely, unprecedented flooding in our area, with 18 to 20 inches of rainwater coming in later this evening. And we're also going to have tropical storm force winds and possibly Category 1 hurricane winds here in the Tampa Bay area.
Hello and welcome to What the F*** Just Happened Today, your essential guide to the daily shock and awe in national politics. I'm Joe Amditis. Let's get to it. It's Wednesday, September 28th, 2022. Welcome to day 617. Joe Biden promised to end hunger in the United States by the end of the decade, unveiling $8 billion in public and private sector commitments to make food healthier, more affordable, and more accessible. It was the first White House summit dedicated to combating hunger in nearly half a century. Quote, "I know we can do this," Biden said. "The goal is within our reach," end quote. Most of the policy proposals, like permanently extending the child tax credit, raising the minimum wage, and expanding nutrition assistance programs, will require congressional approval. Meanwhile, the Congressional Budget Office reported that the poorest half of Americans, roughly 150 million people, hold just 2% of the nation's wealth. The top 10% of American families, meanwhile, account for 72% of the nation's wealth. In 1989, the bottom half of the population held 4% of the total wealth, while the top 10% held 64%. In a statement, Senator Bernie Sanders said, quote, "This report confirms what we already know. The very rich are getting much, much richer, while the middle class is falling further and further behind, and being forced to take on outrageous levels of debt. The obscene level of income and wealth inequality in America is a profoundly moral issue that we cannot continue to ignore or sweep under the rug," end quote. At the same time, Biden warned that Social Security and Medicare are on the chopping block if Republicans regain control of Congress. Some Republicans have called for restructuring or scaling back of entitlement programs, with Rick Scott going as far as to draft a plan that would sunset Social Security and Medicare. Social Security's combined reserves, meanwhile, are projected to be depleted in 2035. After that, the program will be able to pay about 77% of the scheduled benefits unless Congress steps in. Roughly 56 million people received retirement and survivor benefits in 2021. Moving on, the European Union proposed new sanctions in response to Russia's escalation of its war in Ukraine by drafting at least 300,000 men into its army, threatening the use of nuclear weapons, and holding sham referendums. European leaders also vowed a robust and united response to the sabotage of the Nord Stream 1 and 2 pipelines. The White House, meanwhile, said that Russia's attempts to annex 4 Ukrainian regions under its control were illegitimate and outrageous. White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre said, quote, "The Russian government falsified the results to advance the lie that the Ukrainian people want to be part of Russia," end quote. The Biden administration also announced another $1.1 billion in additional security assistance for Ukraine, bringing the total U.S. commitment to more than $16.2 billion. And finally, Mitch McConnell endorsed a bipartisan electoral count reform bill in the Senate, which now has public support from 11 Republican senators, enough to overcome the chamber's 60-vote filibuster threshold. The legislation aims to stop future presidents from trying to overturn election results through Congress by raising the threshold for lawmakers to object to the electoral count, and reaffirms that the vice president has only a ministerial role in the count of electoral votes. The House passed its own version of the bill last week. Prior to McConnell's endorsement, the Senate Rules Committee voted to advance the bill, and Ted Cruz was the lone senator to vote against it. And in the polls, Politico says 52% of voters say they support Congress reforming the electoral vote count law, while 53% said it should be more difficult for state governments to override presidential election results. CBS News says 5% of Americans, roughly 13 million adults, agree that the use of force is justified to restore Trump as president. Roughly 3.32% of Americans, 8.5 million adults, said they would participate in the use of force to restore Trump to the presidency. And NBC News says 42% of Republicans identify as MAGA Republicans, while 58% disavow the term. That's all for now. You can find the links and sources for all of these stories on the main website. And as always, visit whatthefjusthappenedtoday.com for the latest news and headlines. Until next time, I'm Joe Amditas.
The N-word. You know what the N-word is? It's no. It's the nuclear word. He mentioned the N-word yesterday, the nuclear word, not supposed to be mentioned.